And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. What we like to do here on Live Now, as you know, is really devote some time to break down the latest developments going on in so many of these conflicts in the Middle East. We do have the sun now coming up there and some of these vantage points. Take a look at this. There over the Gaza skyline, that's from southern Israel, also in Tel Aviv in the upper right, and the Israeli-Lebanese border in the bottom right here. So this is the news. U.S. Middle East peace envoy Steve Witkoff said he is recalling the U.S. negotiating team from Doha, Qatar, for consultation, saying Hamas showed a lack of desire to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. He posted there on X today saying, "We have decided to bring our team home from Doha for consultations after the latest response from Hamas, which clearly shows a lack of desire to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. While the mediators have made a great effort, Hamas does not appear to be coordinated or acting in good faith. We will now consider alternative options to bring the hostages home and try to create a more stable environment for the people of Gaza. It is a shame that Hamas has acted in this selfish way. We are resolute in seeking an end to this conflict and a permanent peace in Gaza." Well, Fox News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Trey Yingst has more from the region. Let's watch.
Tonight, Israeli negotiators are returning from Doha to review new ceasefire terms proposed by Hamas. Reports indicate the group issued new demands, including that more Palestinian prisoners be exchanged for Israeli hostages, 20 of whom are believed to be alive. The demands prompting U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, who is now in Italy for meetings with Qatari counterparts, to bring home American mediators. Witkoff saying, in part, Hamas does not appear to be coordinated or acting in good faith. We will now consider alternative options to bring the hostages home and try to create a more stable environment for the people of Gaza. It is a shame that Hamas has acted in this selfish way. Inside Gaza, a humanitarian disaster is looming. A Palestinian baby named Odai is placed on a scale in Gaza City. The young boy's parents were killed. Odai's uncle worries his life is slipping away.
Uday is suffering severe malnutrition. He's not accepting milk or nutrients nor supplements at all, and that's all due to his very difficult health condition.
Odai's story is not unique. 1 million children are at risk of increasing hunger in the Gaza Strip, according to UNICEF. Disagreements between the heads of UN agencies and the Israeli military about how to distribute aid already inside the enclave is pushing the Palestinian territory deeper into crisis.
One of the main challenges we have is that the number of delays inside Gaza once we are moving from the entry points to Gaza to our final destination points inside Gaza.
Tonight, Fox News obtained new video showing chaotic scenes inside Gaza as UN aid trucks entered. Groups of Palestinians rushing the trucks, trying to get some of the aid. In Tel Aviv, Trey Yingst, Fox News.
Trey, thanks so much. Bringing into the conversation now some of our friends and colleagues there at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, including analyst David Daoud. He joins me. David, thanks for being with us here. So it seems like it's Groundhog Day all over again with regard to the hostage ceasefire talks. The United States pulling out of them, Israel pulling out of them because Hamas is doing what it, frankly, has always done here. Witkoff saying, though, they're looking for alternative options. What do you think he means by that? The Associated Press has this caveat. Witkoff did not clarify what the alternatives were. What are they, if any? I think, David, you might be muted there.
My apologies. That is a good question, and it's a pleasure to be on, Andrew. It's been a while. Your guess is as good as mine. The White House has been very mum on what this means. I think there's a White House press secretary who was asked and did not give a straight answer. I don't think we know exactly what those alternatives may be. Perhaps the likeliest situation is going to be that we consult with the Israelis on what options are available to put more pressure on Hamas to soften its position. Now, the sticking point has been, as it remains, like you're saying, it's Groundhog Day all over again. The sticking point has always been that there's an unbridgeable gap between the Israeli position, which is Hamas surrenders, Hamas gives up not just its governance, but its arms. And while Hamas has shown some degree of willingness to talk about surrendering governance when it comes to its arms, its existence as a militia, which is really the threat to the state of Israel, which is really what led to October 7th and the war that's going on. There, Hamas isn't budging, and they're asking for a total end to the conflict prior to releasing all the hostages and the remains of the hostages, where the Israelis are saying that unless Hamas surrenders entirely, again, governance and militarily, there will be no end to this conflict. So that's an unbridgeable gap. I don't know what the options are that Steve Witkoff wants to explore to bridge that gap, but perhaps it comes in the form of more military pressure from Israel to push Hamas closer to accepting the United States and Israel's positions on this ceasefire.
David, what's the Qataris' role here? Can't the United States and Israel just say to the Qataris, they're the mediators, they go back to Hamas with whatever is agreed upon? Can't they say to the Qataris, it's now or never? Let's get this done here. Because in his statement, Witkoff said this: Hamas does not appear to be coordinated or acting in good faith. Is there a distinct possibility that the Qataris, the Americans, the Israelis, they don't know who to go back to? Who's representing Hamas?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Hamas and Qatar have a long-standing relationship where, to a certain degree, Qatar acts as Hamas's patron. Right? You have Hamas officials that reside in Qatar. Qatar was sending the de facto government in Gaza, which was Hamas-controlled, money for years. It's unclear if Qatar wants a total surrender of Hamas, wants a total victory for the Israeli side. If Hamas surrenders its weapons, surrenders its control over the Gaza Strip, basically, and gives up the hostages, returns the hostages home. This is a total surrender to Israel's objectives. It is an acknowledgement of defeat. I don't know if that Qatar wants this out of Hamas. If we look at how their media, if their media outlets, Al Jazeera and so on, are any indication of their sentiments on this conflict, they sound like a Hamas mouthpiece. So, are they trying to kind of find some middle ground between preserving Hamas while giving the Israelis an off ramp that is doesn't fully satisfy Israel's needs, but allows it to walk away at least with the hostages return and kind of a return to the status quo ante that existed on October 6th? Perhaps that's where the Qataris are now. The question is, how much influence do they still have over Hamas to the degree that Hamas's leadership has been decimated within the Gaza Strip? That's a separate question.
I mean, Hamas's leaders have been taken out, picked off one by one by Israel. And so I think, people coming to this story periodically throughout the course of now almost 2 years are scratching their heads. They're wondering, how does Hamas have any leverage in these talks anymore? Yes, they still have hostages, dead and alive, but that seems to be their only negotiating point here. David, I want to transition our conversation. Let's go back to some of our live vantage points there in and around the Middle East. Ambassador Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, he tweeted out a photo of some of these aid trucks. And you're hearing from many world leaders, especially in the West, David, that the humanitarian situation in Gaza has reached a very, very dire fever pitch. Now, you have heard that throughout the course of this entire conflict, but to me, having watched the ins and outs of this conflict each and every day since October 7th, it seems to be different. It seems that Canada, Australia, UK, and others, we just reported a couple of days ago on that joint statement, numerous countries saying Israel needs to do more, the world needs to do more to address the humanitarian situation in Gaza. What is so different about it now? Why is it so dire now?
Well, like you said, I think it's been considered dire from the outset. I think part of why you're seeing this increased pressure is that the war has continued for almost 2 years. We're running up on a couple of months short of 2 years, coming October 7th of 2025, and there's no end in sight. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is complicated. You have the GHF, which has been trying to distribute aid in a its successes have been up and down, so to speak. Look, distributing humanitarian aid in an active conflict zone is one of the most difficult tasks that anyone can undertake. When you're talking about an organization, an entity like GHF, which is relatively new, they're learning on a very steep learning curve. They're operating on a very steep learning curve, and there's been complications, to put it very lightly, complications that Hamas has an interest in benefiting from. At the same time, you have Israeli concerns about aid coming through the United Nations falling into Hamas's hands and giving Hamas a lifeline to continue the fight. So there's been this tension between how do you get aid into Gaza? How do you ensure that aid reaches its recipients rather than reaching the wrong hands and contributing to the continuation of this war, rather than to alleviating the humanitarian suffering of the Gazans themselves. Plus, again, I think primarily for these Western countries, the death toll is rising. This war does not seem to be ending anytime soon. And with that, obviously, the humanitarian situation is going to grow. The pressure on Israel to take more responsibility for the lives of Gazans on the day-to-day is going to grow.
So Ambassador Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, with this photo saying, here are photos of UN trucks saying enough food to feed all of Gaza, but it sits rotting, saying the UN is a tool of Hamas. U.S.-based GHF is actually delivering food for free and safely. UN food is either looted by Hamas or rots in the sun. He says those photos are from yesterday. The food aid distribution has been a side story in this entire conflict, David. You know that. And you have these competing groups who are trying to deliver it, some to no avail. To Ambassador Huckabee's point, it doesn't get to where it needs to go for numerous different reasons here. Is there going to be some type of change of approach in this or not?
I mean, I don't think anything, if there is a change in approach, and perhaps there should be, I don't think it's going to happen overnight. Unfortunately, with things like this, it's the process of trial and error. You're trying to hit a moving target in an active combat zone with an actor that has an interest in, again, Hamas, and an interest in aid not reaching its recipients, magnifying the humanitarian disaster, magnifying the impact of the war on average Gazans, puts pressure on Israel through the international community, as we're seeing, to stop the war prematurely, giving Hamas a lifeline. At the same time, getting the aid through reliable mechanisms to Gazans. It's a complicated task that you have entities like the GHF. There's a lot of criticism of them. I think they're trying to operate in good faith, but again, I think the UN agencies are to some degree trying to operate in good faith.
Okay.
But the GHF is operating on a steep learning curve. I think the UN agencies don't have the ability to secure that aid from falling into the hands of Hamas. So you have this tension. Whatever change needs to happen is going to happen through a process of trial and error. And unfortunately, it becomes more complicated by the fact that we are dealing with an active combat situation.
David, let's move our conversation into an announcement made by French President Emmanuel Macron earlier today, saying that come September, later this fall, reminding our viewers, in New York City, each and every September is the UN General Assembly. World leaders come, they say their piece there on the dais. He says during his speech, the French nation will recognize that a state of Palestine exists. I want to put this post up here. Macron says, consistent with its historic commitment to a just and lasting peace in the Middle East, I have decided France will recognize the state of Palestine. I will make this solemn announcement before the United Nations General Assembly this coming September, saying the urgent priority today is to end the war in Gaza and to bring relief to the civilian population. He says peace is possible, saying we need an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and massive humanitarian aid for the people of Gaza. He says we must also ensure the demilitarization of Hamas, secure and rebuild Gaza. And finally, we must build the state of Palestine, guarantee its viability, and ensure that by accepting its demilitarization and fully recognizing Israel, it contributes to the security of all in the region. Now, David, in the wake of October 7th, as Israel prosecutes this war in the Gaza Strip against Hamas, you can make the argument, many have, that the long-standing U.S. policy in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine, the two-state solution, was all but dead, the nail in the coffin of that very policy. What is France doing here? They are a member of the G7. I was reading that if Macron goes through with this and does this and doesn't kind of buck to pressure he's getting, they will be the only member of the G7 to recognize the state of Palestine. When a nation like France says that they will officially recognize a Palestinian state, does it redound to the benefit of Gazans, of Palestinians? Who does it benefit? Why does it matter?
Look, France is a major power on the world scene. France is a major power within the European Union. They're arguably the most influential power within the European Union. So it does have some resonance. It is not the tree that fell in the woods and no one was there to hear the sound. At the same time, what does it do practically? What are we talking about when we mean the recognition of the state of Palestine? Mere recognition by France, first of all, doesn't create a state of Palestine. It just puts France on a collision course with Israel, which is not going to end its control of the West Bank because, like you said, October 7th, I think, revealed or kind of touched that Israeli raw nerve that was very hesitant about granting the Palestinians a state neighboring them, lest they do from the West Bank what happened from Gaza. But at the same time, it does nothing to resolve the outstanding questions that have made the achievement of a two-state solution nearly impossible for decades and under better conditions. I'm not just talking about, over the past decade or so, but at the height of optimism in the mid to late 1990s, early 2000s, you had the question of Jerusalem, the question of mutual recognition and the permanent end to the conflict, the issue of Palestinian refugees in surrounding countries and where do they go, the so-called right of return. And the Palestinians have never abandoned this. So French recognition does nothing to resolve these maximalist Palestinian positions. They do nothing to alleviate Israeli concerns about the threat that a Palestinian state in the most sensitive part, overlooking the most sensitive part of Israel, could pose to Israel's safety and security, even to its existence. So it all it does is alleviate pressure off the Palestinians to abandon these maximalist positions, to come to a more conciliatory approach, to something that's realistic that the Israelis can accept, because the Israelis realistically are not going to accept not a division of Jerusalem, not millions of Palestinians coming back and changing the fundamental character of the state of Israel, which was built to be a Jewish state. So the French position ends up being more of a spoiler. We see them also doing this in Lebanon, mind you. Rather than being productive, they act as a spoiler. Rather than something that's actually going to push towards a resolution of the conflict that is mutually acceptable to Israelis and Palestinians.
So the United States and Israel, they don't want France to do this. Bibi Netanyahu saying this in very strong terms, that we strongly condemn President Macron's decision to recognize a Palestinian state next to Tel Aviv in the wake of the October 7th massacre, saying such a move rewards terror and risks creating another Iranian proxy, just as Gaza became, saying a Palestinian state in these conditions would be a launch pad to annihilate Israel, not to live in peace beside it. Let's be clear, he says, the Palestinians do not seek a state alongside Israel. They seek a state instead of Israel. Secretary of State here, Marco Rubio, also condemning these moves today, and we have the Rubio statement, saying the United States strongly rejects Emmanuel Macron's plan to recognize a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly. This reckless decision only serves Hamas propaganda and sets back peace. It is a slap in the face to the victims of October 7th. Very strong words there from Rubio. David, lastly, while we have you, let's stay in France. Let's go to Paris here. Earlier today, senior Israeli and Syrian ministers met there in Paris for about 4 hours under the auspices of President Trump's special envoy on Syria, Tom Barak, and discussed de-escalation and tensions between the countries. This really kind of boiled over the weekend. We got some of these very kind of slapdash, hastily made ceasefires between so many of these groups and factions in Syria. Israel got involved, striking in airstrikes, the very heart of Syria in central Damascus over this. Will it hold? I guess that's the question everyone's asking. What were these talks today about?
Mm-hmm. I will add one thing to the previous issue as well. I think Macron's position could be leverage, used as leverage over the Israelis. End the war in Gaza. We won't recognize a Palestinian state, kind of similar to what they did with the ICC case and their involvement in the ceasefire mechanism in Lebanon. As it relates to Israel and Syria, look, this is a continuation of talks, as far as I see it, that predated the tensions over the past 2 weeks in Syria, where you started to see talk surprisingly to some degree, of normalization initially between Israel and Syria, and then a little bit more realistically about security coordination between the two countries on issues of mutual interest in areas that affect both of their security, namely in southern Syria. What neither Syria nor Israel, as much as distrust as there exists between these two countries, want is a return of Iranian influence in that region and fractiousness. Druze separatism, Kurdish separatism, this contributes, it facilitates the return of Iranian influence in this region. This does not help Syria, this does not help Israel. So I would say part of the talks are going to be a continuation of those perhaps security-oriented talks. How do we, as Israel and Syria don't have diplomatic relations, you have contentions over the ownership of the Golan Heights, you have outstanding issues that, long road before you can make peace. But how do we live together? How do we make sure that this neighborhood is more secure for both of our countries? And how do we work together where we can agree right now? The second part, I would say, is how you avoid a flare-up the way we saw over the past 2 weeks, where the Israelis wrongly, I think, have made a commitment to get involved in Syria's internal dynamics by committing to protect the Druze at seemingly all costs. Despite the fact that this is a very complex situation internally, and there were unconfirmed reports that what happened, the Syrian government moving in to Sueda to intervene to break up tensions between the Druze and the Bedouins, arose out of a misunderstanding between the Israelis and the Syrians, that the Israelis were okay with the presence of Syrian forces south of Damascus, which the Israelis previously said were not okay with. So this misunderstanding led to the tensions, led to Israeli intervention, attack on Damascus, attacks on governmental forces. So perhaps, as part of the overall security talks, perhaps there's a deconfliction mechanism that's going to be talked about. One where these parties which don't have direct talks, how can they understand each other better, their red lines better, their respective needs better, and how do they avoid another situation that leads to direct clashes the way we saw over the past 2 weeks?
All right, David Daoud, as always, quite comprehensive. We can't thank you enough. We kind of moved around a lot in the region there, and we'll talk soon. Have a good night.